When I think of the point of your podcast, Bad Bosses, Great Leaders, you could almost distill it down to that. The
Yeah.
distinction is generosity. And I think generosity comes in many different forms.
Therese, I'm so excited to have you on the show today. I know we've been planning this for a couple of weeks now, and you reached out, and I was really excited to get to chat with you all about your leadership background and your book that's coming out. Now, I understand you're in facilitation, so I want to have for our audience a good understanding of your background and how that's led you into the leadership world
Yeah.
and what your work has been recently.
Okay. All right. That's a great place to start. And I will say for probably most of your listeners, like, okay, facilitation, that's not for me. Maybe I can fast forward through this, but I'm going to make the case for why you shouldn't, because I think it's a misunderstood word. And I think we often think of it as something somebody else does, like a professional facilitator or trainer. And that is not what I am talking about. I am talking about every single one of us that has to lead meetings, have conversations, work with groups of people, because in the essence of the term facilitate, the actual Latin term is to make things easier, to render less difficult. And I don't know many people these days that don't have that as a part of their responsibility. Make it easier for people to understand why things are changing. Make it easier for people to come on board with your idea. Make it easier for people to, give you funding or, resources, or, make it easier for a tough conversation that still has to be had. So that's what we're talking about when we describe facilitation. It is a skill for all of us.
So tell us, like, how has that moved you along in the leadership world?
Sure. Well, it started a bit when I led global learning and development for a multi-billion-dollar company. And I think, like a lot of people in organizations, I did not have a lot of resources. I did not have a training team. I was really, really thin. And we were starting to roll out leadership skill building across the globe. And then I was like, okay, I don't have a lot of money and I'm only one person. How am I going to make this happen? And the answer was, all right, well, if we could tap on the shoulder the best leaders in the company, like the exemplars, like if we could photocopy them, let's get them to train it. Luckily we had people who were like, okay, I'll listen. What is this all about? And because they knew how to be good leaders. They knew how to give feedback. They knew how to delegate. They knew how to listen and communicate, but they didn't necessarily know how to engage groups of people. And so at the time, I partnered with a company called Proteus. I'm still very much affiliated with them to learn a methodology of alongside anyone's subject matter knowledge. And it doesn't matter if you're an engineer, a accountant, a salesperson, whatever, you have your domain knowledge. But that's not often enough when you're working with people. And so that's where I first got this exposure to this whole idea that there's a set of skills that complement your subject matter expertise that, when in combination, make you an incredibly influential person that draws others to you. So that's where I first got exposure to it. And then what happened was this faculty that I had, they were again in sales and marketing and, engineering, all different parts of the organization. They would come back and say, hey, those skills helped me in a really rough sales conversation with a customer. Or I had this really high stakes meeting with this leader and I was really nervous. And those facilitation skills helped me show up with more confidence. And that, one and one, you put two and two together. And I realized these are skills that really I wanted to bring to everybody, because I really have seen them make a difference for people who want to overcome the struggles that a lot of us find ourselves in. Endless Zoom meetings or team meetings, right? The eighth meeting of the day, you're tired. And, you might have a really important topic you want people to buy into. Well, how are you going to do that? It's not just going to be your slides and your technical information. It's going to be pulling on other skills, like how well you tell a story, because story is really sticky. And we'll remember stories more than we would just remember data on a slide. So that's
That that's a great segue too. Do you have a story of someone having to either go through that experience and navigating the challenges of learning how to be a leader in that way? Or, maybe it's quite the opposite, why it's important, and somebody who struggled and never really fully grasped that. understanding.
Yeah. So one of my roles earlier in my career, I would be sitting in the back of a room with senior executives making decisions about talent. Who's ready for a promotion, who could take the next big job. And it never really fall down like their domain expertise. Like, oh, they need to know more about accounting or they need to know more about the market. It really, we weren't saying the word facilitation skills, but that's what they meant. So I sat in the back of the room like, okay, then I got to help people close the gap. And so, I recently worked with a expert who is a phenomenal engineer and is being promoted at a very, very fast pace. And he came to me because he said, first of all, I have like real bad imposter syndrome. Because I'm
Mhm.
sitting in a room with people that are my parents' age, and I'm expected to be this leader that, has all this, wisdom and knowledge. And it's the first time I've had to really lead a team. And no one's really taught me how to do that. And so we pulled from the book things like, all right, you got to start first inside, like your mindset, like how you talk to yourself impacts how you show up. So we worked on that. We worked on how to adapt his style to different audiences because everybody that we meet tends to want maybe something different when we communicate with them. So we worked on how do you flex your approach? Then we worked on, all right, how do you listen really well? For instance, he would run into situations where he'd get a curveball question. And like, who hasn't been in that situation, right? Even as much as you prepare for a meeting, you get the question you weren't expecting or you don't have an answer to, and now you feel a little flat footed. And so we worked on that. Like, there's a choice when you get questions you don't know the answer to, or you're not even really sure what they're asking. And so the bottom line, this person went from just a really technically good expert who was wobbly in his new role as a leader to one that's already since then been promoted again. And what he's saying is now he's relying more on those skills and less on the technical skills because he's now in a more strategic role. So I think it's a really practical set of skills that really can unlock some of your potential.
It's a great example and really does make me think back to either having some of those conversations where, is this person ready for a promotion or not yet, or having conversations to help prepare people for promotions and talking to them about the understanding that you can be really great at your job as a specialist, or maybe you're even a generalist in your role. I work in marketing, so digital marketers are often considered generalists. Social media marketers are considered generalists oftentimes. You can be really great at that job, but if you haven't practiced or understand there's a difference between that role and managing people in a new role, it can throw people for a curve just in general. And so the work that you're doing, it sounds like it's really helping people understand the mindset shift like you talk about and then putting it into practice.
Yeah, exactly. So when you were in those roles, how did you learn to make that jump from call it like super doer? So someone who's really, really gifted at whatever it is, social media marketing or, IT, whatever, and move from super doer because you're relied on a lot for what you know to now leader. How did you make that leap?
That's a great question. Part of it was being available to help other people. And oftentimes that was in training and showing people what I was doing and what worked. I would say I guess if I were to go all the way back, the first people I led were children in children's theater way back when. And that in itself is a task. And so learning how to communicate with kids in groups and corral them and somehow make a children's theater piece happen, working in theater and learning how to be a communicator, that set a really good foundation for me to learn how to communicate with other people and
Yeah.
people from different backgrounds, from different skill sets. So I had a very unique journey. I think we all have our own unique journeys. Mine gave me the foundation for that.
Yeah.
And then on the other side of it is being very organized and having systems. I was able to teach people those systems and help train the team. And part of it is being ready to help further. Sometimes not even with the expectation that it's going to get you a promotion, but how do we be ready when the time comes so that if we are tapped for that next thing, that we're showing up with humility and a willingness to serve and a curiosity to learn more? Because I feel like the learning more, and that's kind of what this podcast is about, is going to help you advance knowing that we don't know it all and we can't know it all. So how can we at least have that Kaizen, constant steady improvement mentality as leaders?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. You know what makes me think about your story is an underpinning of that seems like it's generosity.
Mm,
Generosity in that you really take the time to think about how do I deliver messages? How do I communicate knowing it's not going to hit everybody's ears the same way? I might have to deliver information in a different way. That's generous because it takes time. And generosity in terms of sharing what giving of your time or your expertise to bring other people along. And, when I think of the point of your podcast, Bad Bosses, Great Leaders, you could almost distill it down to that. The
yeah,
distinction is generosity. And I think generosity comes in many different forms. In the book, The Facilitation Advantage that I co-wrote, I think one of the most generous things you could do as a leader is listen. And I think sometimes that sounds counterintuitive because I think most people are like, oh, yeah, all I do is listen. I'm in 8 meetings a day. But I don't think most of us know how to listen as a skill. I think we know how to passively hear, but I think most of us are already thinking of the next thing to say. We're having our own dialogue in our head and we're not really listening below the surface. And that requires you to focus less on yourself and more on the speaker. And I just think that is just another word for generosity.
I love that. Thank you for beautifully summarizing that, Therese. I think you're right. There's a key element to communication is listening, and it can be hard for us, even those of us that know better too, can be hard to practice that. If I'm someone who doesn't understand that, or maybe I know I'm working on that, what are some very practical tips you can share with folks on how to be a better listener?
Well, first thing I would let all of us know is that we should all kind of give ourselves a break because where did we ever learn it? Like I don't know about you, but I didn't learn it in school. I didn't learn it in college. There wasn't a listening class in grad school. I mean, did you ever get any formal education on listening?
No, I would say in theater, you are taught to listen to your scene partner. And at the same time, I've also worked with plenty of actors and directors who clearly were not listening, but they were kind of similar to what you were describing. They're waiting for the next chance to say their line. So it happens to all of us, whether it's a part of your job and you know it's a part of your job or not.
Yeah. Okay, I'll give you 3 practical things. So the first thing is if you want to genuinely be a good listener and reap the benefits of good listening, the first thing is you have to focus on your mindset. So this is back to everything emanates from the voice in your head. And you've got to be honest with yourself. I mean, if you're running meeting to meeting to meeting and someone stops in and pops their head in and says, "Hey, do you have a second?" And you say yes, but you really don't have a second, your self-talk is probably some version of just move on. Like, can you get to your point? Or if you just stop talking, I will give you the answer, right? Like our voice in our heads lean us towards either genuinely listening or just giving signals, false signals of listening. And so even sometimes if it's I don't have time for this, I would want to plant a seed in your head if you want to be a good listener it might be something like, okay, I only have 2 minutes right now, but I'm going to give them my undivided attention. And I'm not saying say that out loud. I'm saying think it. Or, instead of if they would just stop talking, I would give them the answer. You might lean to thinking, even though I have the answer, it shows respect when I let them finish their idea.
Hmm.
So that's the first thing is you've got to be able to be in the mindset of being a good listener. The second thing that I would tell you is this is a skill that is very advanced and it sounds simple, but simple does not mean easy. And it's the skill of restating. And restating is simply verbalizing another person's point of view, but in your own words. And this is where I think people get it confused. So if you said something to me and I said, yeah, I understand.
Hmm.
That's not what I'm talking about because that's not giving you a signal through my words that I caught your meaning and caught your point of view. And a lot of times, if you might have had a boss that has gone through some leadership training, they come back and they sound like a technique. And I'm not talking about that. So tell me if this has ever happened to you, Rebecca, where someone starts with, well, what I think I hear you saying is, have you ever
Yeah.
heard that? And it's kind of like, okay, when is that going to wear off? I'm talking about genuinely just offering, your interpretation.
Hmm.
So if you say a paragraph worth of things, I'm just going to say a couple words in my own words. Nobody wants a parrot. So if I literally repeated the words you said, you'd be like, that's annoying.
Hmm.
Sometimes what people want is just for us to understand their feeling. And I'm not saying agree with it. I'm saying what's under the surface is they want some acknowledgement that, let's say, a lot of organizations are going through reorg right now. And that means roles are changing. Sadly, some jobs are being eliminated. And so if a manager, comes to you and says, oh, your, role's completely changed. Sometimes what listening will be is acknowledging the feeling behind that of, losing a colleague or the pressure it's going to put on you. And so that's what I mean by restating helps you get below the surface. And I work with a lot of leaders who feel like they are in a bad game of whack-a-mole, like they're solving the same problem over and over and over, and they're real frustrated. And
Yeah.
it's a real signal to me that they're not restating.
Mm.
I think the more we're in our careers and we feel like we've seen it all, we think, we jump to conclusions really quickly about what's happening as opposed to restating to get to what's the root of the issue. So self-talk, restating. And then the last thing about listening is how you draw people out. And my one tip is to never again say this one question. Okay, here goes. Do you have any questions?
Yes.
Okay, so if you're with me on that, Rebecca, what about that feels like it's such a lame question that doesn't result in much?
A couple of things. So one, it can be very standard and is overused, and it feels very much like let's get this meeting over with, ready to wrap.
Yeah.
Please have any questions, depending on how it's delivered. It also doesn't really leave room for the understanding that people probably do have questions and they might be afraid to ask them. So instead, I like to say, especially when I can remember, I'm sure I still fall into the pitfall too, but what questions do you have? And then that way, it's giving the assumption that I know you all probably have questions, so I'm open to hearing them. Or you got some other thoughts there too.
I completely agree. I think you would get, and you tell me, do you usually get more reaction or response when you ask that as the
Well, yeah,
any
and
questions?
if I find that the room my company's virtual, so it's all remote, we're all on virtual Zoom meetings, so you don't get the same kind of energy from that, and you have to pay attention to people and visually how they're reacting and responding.
Yeah.
Part of a group meeting, I like to actually ask them, "So, Therese, what's your thought on that? Do you have any feedback or insight for me?"
Hmm.
And if they're feeling a little antsy, then it's like, "Hey, it's cool if you don't have it now, but I welcome it later. Just take some time to think about it." And I find that it helps people open up a little bit better rather than hiding on Zoom and feeling like, "Oh, Rebecca's just talking at me."
Well said. Of course, you're an expert. So you're an expert interviewer. So yeah, and I think for your listeners, it's exactly that. And if you put little bit more effort into planning your questions, you're
Mm,
gonna find it goes a lot farther versus especially virtually when you ask something and it's just like no one speaks up. It's easy to blame the group and think, oh, well, it was just low energy or, the group didn't have any questions. Instead of blaming the group, look a little inward and like, are my questions curious enough to really draw people out? And
yeah.
so it could be, instead of do you have any questions, you might say, I just did this yesterday in a group. I said, what are you excited about in terms of what I just showed?
That's a great one.
Or, what do you think it's going to take to be able to pull this off?
Mhm.
It's just like a click more of curiosity. It will pay off just in loads in terms of getting people to talk. I'll give you one other tip around these questions. And this is also true when your communication is like through text or Slack or whatever, medium. Maybe tell me if this has happened to you this week. A text that comes through that says, do you have a second?
Not this week, and I actually counsel my team not to ask people questions or like, "Hey, can we talk?"
Yes, right.
They are the worst.
They're the worst. They're the worst. And here's why they're the worst. We as humans tend to fill in the blanks when a question like that comes through. And it usually is wrong because they're making us an assumption, right? And I did this. We even, with best of intentions, we do this. So I used to be an HR leader and I'm passing through, an area where some of my direct reports are in their cubes and I'm not thinking. I'm on to the next thing and I duck my head into somebody's cube and I say, "Hey, can you see me in my office?" I know. I know. I still feel guilty. I still feel guilty, right? She comes into my office and she's like, "Are you firing me?" And of course, shame on me. I was in HR. I should know way better. But I'm like, "No, no, no, no. I wanted to show you something, that, I came, brought back from, a conference I was at." And so the number one thing any listener can do this right away is you've got to preview your question. It's really small and simple, but it will save you a ton of time because also people will be inclined to give you more of a straight answer. So back to, do you have a second? You have to give a little context. So it might be, "Hey, the client is coming in for a visit, for lunch. Do you have a second?" Or, "We're finalizing the budget and we need to know we want you to look at this number. Do you have a second?" Or, "Something hilarious just happened. Do you have a second?" And you can imagine with that context, you might get three different answers. And so it's a way, if you get frustrated because you're like, "I want things to move faster," again, like look at how you're asking questions that could be the culprit for, why, you get weird answers back or like, long diatribes of, and I'll give you one other example of this happening. One of my bosses that I worked for who falls into the very great leader category. And this was when I returned after having a baby and I was working from home on Fridays. And it was still kind of new to do that. And my boss just sends me a text and she's like, "Where are you?" Well, I go into full panic mode and I spend the next 5 minutes crafting a text back. "Well, I'm working on this and this and this and this and this." Because in my mind, she's thinking, "Oh, she must not think that I'm working and I'm playing with the baby," and right, all these things that immediately flooded my brain. And this was a great boss, by the way. This was not even a bad boss. And so I send all this note and then, three bubbles, three bubbles, three bubbles. And she's like, "Oh, I know all that. I just wanted to know if you're near your computer so I can show you stuff." And anyway, it was even the best of us do this. And it's the simplest thing I could tell everybody to do that would be a game changer.
Man, you're speaking my language there, Therese, because it's very panic and anxiety inducing when you get a message like that. And I love that you shared that. I've not had anyone actually bring that up. The other part to it I would add, and I'd love to hear what you think about this, is the understanding that you might not have a second,
Hmm.
or if it's your boss, especially who's messaging you,
Yeah.
could be other team members, but you might be torn between, well, you wanted me to work on this project and I have this priority, or I'm on a call with a client. I don't have a second. I'm about to do X, Y, or Z. And yet you feel the pull because they're your boss to drop everything and attend to whatever it is they need. And how do you have that conversation or address that? And that's why we're bubbles, 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 trying to figure out, how do I tell them that you gave me this thing? Or so that's why I share with my team, tell someone why. You also need to meet with them, not from just the psychological safety point of view, but also the priority point of view. And if you need me, I need to know so that I know, do I need to drop everything and go help this person? Or can I fit it into my day at another point as well?
You raise a good point. Even when you don't get a good preview to a question like that, I think that we can all do more about asking for the context. Instead of trying to solve a puzzle of like, what could it be? Maybe it's this, maybe it's that. And we burn all this mental energy trying to figure out how to answer that. And I think that you could simply say, "Yes, is this a priority interrupt? I'm heads down on this right now." And so it's not saying no or pushing it off, but it's kind of let's use an improv term, yes, and, or, uh, yeah, I can do that. Can you help me understand? I want to give you the best answer. Can you give me more context? And I don't
Mm,
find anybody gets offended by asking for that. Sometimes, especially when you can tie it to speed. Like I can get you that faster if I know a little bit more about what exactly are you asking for.
absolutely. That's great verbiage there to use. I hope people steal that. And well, I hope bosses stop asking the question, or at least we
Yeah.
we all have to recognize that to stop that pattern. But that's a great way to respond to it.
Yeah.
because I feel like people want to be tactful and they want to still be able to meet expectations.
My worst story, this came recently. I was working with a peer group, and we were talking about this manager felt horrible. He had this light bulb moment. He goes, "Oh my god, I just asked this question this past week, which was to someone, why did you do it that way?" And he said it immediately put this person on the defensive, and it got to be this like tense conversation. And he's like, what he didn't share was that part of his new role was continuous improvement. And so he
Mm,
wasn't asking to try to get this person to admit their wrongdoing. He was trying to get to, where are their best practices to learn from, and where are there places where there's opportunity. Well,
yeah.
I think sometimes when we're leaders, we are moving so fast that we think it's obvious, and rarely is it obvious. And that's so extra true for virtual hybrid environments where we may not be able to have additional context that we do when we're together.
That's a great point that you
Mm.
raise, and it makes me think about how the pro to being remote or having a hybrid remote situation is that you have more things in writing, and on the other reverse side of that, you lose a lot in tone.
Mhm.
And I could interpret something that you said. Maybe we could both be speaking a little bit more clearly, and again, with maybe tact, maybe we need to approach how we're choosing our words in that
Mhm.
situation. At the same time, you could use the best words possible and someone still interprets it incorrectly, and so navigating, is this worth a voice memo versus a
Mhm.
meeting versus do I really maybe need to be more careful with the words that I'm using in general?
Yeah, or I just was having this conversation with the head of sales. I'm curious how you would answer this, because his problem is that he's finding the younger career people just don't want to pick up a phone.
Mm,
And so he has a sales organization that he finds that most of his early career talent just prefer to respond by email or text to their customers versus this is probably one where I should actually talk live. What are your thoughts on this idea of there's lots of different modes of communication? How do you get people to choose one that they may not be the most comfortable with?
that is tough, and I've faced that before. I will say full transparency, I actually hate calling on the phone myself. I think it's, from some maybe early childhood trauma of having to leave voicemails and, like, the panic of what is this technology? That said, in my job, I have had to overcome that and help other people overcome that, and I first come with understanding that there are so many ways to communicate that we have so many more opportunities to ignore each other.
Mhm.
And especially when working with clients, if you are not meeting them where they're at,
Yeah.
then it's easier for them to feel like they're being ignored.
Yeah.
That might not be the case. So I like to demonstrate it as hard as it can be to be the person if you don't like it, but there's still value in demonstrating like, hey, I understand it can feel scary because you don't know what you're going to be met with on the other end versus an email where you're given a little bit more time to prep, choose your words carefully. So I've coached people to it's that sort of immediacy of like, let's pick up the phone and get in the habit, the practice, picking up the phone
Mhm.
and to steal from Nike, just doing it.
Yeah.
Other side of it, let me show you how I can also prep for those conversations. And that's where the beauty of remote can be, or even just phone calls in general. You can have some notes in front of you to guide your conversation, not necessarily script it because
Mhm.
it could be robotic,
Right.
but guide the conversation. And then if you feel like you need to have something in writing, I always encourage folks to have something written as a follow up.
Yeah.
And that will help avoid the he said, she said, because if they disagree with your notes and your perception of a call,
Mhm.
then they have an opportunity to address that with you. So I know you're talking a little bit more about the avoidance and the preference in communication styles. Sometimes there's no way around that. But as leaders, if you're asking that of your team, then you need to give them the tools and equip them with how they can make that thing less scary and figure out what's scary about it for them, and then demonstrate what it looks like to do that with
Yeah.
ease. But to your point, simple is not necessarily easy.
Mhm. That's really well said. and I think this points back to generosity as the distinguisher,
Yeah.
bad boss and great boss, because what you just offered is you can tell people all day to go do something different, but you're shortchanging them if you're not also giving them a runway of like, let me help you get comfortable with that. Let me model it. In the case of this leader, what we devised was let's script something out and have a practice, and where the hidden surprise is that when the person ends up picking up the phone and actually talking live to the customer has more information that they would not have shared had it not been a live conversation. If it was just a text exchange or, hey, can we change this spec to a different color? You just answer, let me check. But really, what was behind it was there was a big debate between the architect and the general contractor. And we're now worried about, price, cost, all these things. You would never know if you didn't talk live. And so it's all to this idea of you got to support people if you want to see a behavior change.
Mm,
That speaks to what you have done in the past of training and demonstrating and modeling and giving them the runway to not be perfect yet, but to also encourage them to like, okay, don't try to do that on the hardest conversation you have.
right.
Do it when it's like no pressure and there's no real motive besides, hey, we haven't talked, we've exchanged a lot of emails, but I just wanted to see, how's it going and have a live conversation. And so I think that's, I've worked with a lot of bad bosses and I've worked with a lot of great bosses over my career. And I guess I keep coming back down to those key things.
Those are great key things, and I love the practice element that you employ. It's so helpful because then you can also give feedback. And the other thing you point out, you don't want to throw someone into a situation where they're going to have to take a really tough what I would call a red flag call
Yes.
right away. So you as a leader need to be strategic in how you're also training that person and what are the various escalation levels
Right.
there too.
Right, right. Exactly, exactly. Yeah, the last thing is I think the great leaders have to find that sweet spot too. I've been working and coaching with a lot of leaders lately on delegation
Mm,
because where is that line between helping and now micromanaging or helping and like now I'm taking it, that red flag call. I'll take it, Rebecca. I'll do it. And then all of a sudden I'm overloaded and there was a missed opportunity for you to learn. And so I'm having a lot of conversations these days around how do you delegate in a way that doesn't feel like dumping, it feels developmental, and it helps you create capacity to keep thinking and working on more high level, high priority things that sometimes fall to the end of your day because all you did was, solve fire.
that makes me think back to something you asked earlier too. How can someone look to get to the next level? And it's by practicing certain elements like that. And if you are looking to get to that next level in your career, making your boss's job easier. And by that, I don't mean you just start taking on their work and doing their job for them, but how can you be more communicative so they can make better decisions? How can you find ways to make it easy for them to coach and manage you?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a free flowing back and forth, and it's more collaborative
Yeah.
than any kind of transactional or whether it's micromanaging or not. It more of a symbiotic kind of relationship.
Yeah.
And what you just said now makes me think about that too in terms of delegation. And my team, my managers have had to learn how to delegate, and they're still learning. And I'm still learning too, because as they grow, then I grow, and I have to learn what's appropriate to delegate here. So, are there examples, of how, and on the one side, how can someone who's looking to level up make things easier for the person who's overseeing them and the work? And then on the other side, what are some very appropriate types of tasks or work that are a stretch goal or maybe a good challenge, but it doesn't feel like I'm dumping on people?
Yeah. Okay. So it's a two-part question. I think the first is you're speaking about how you manage up.
Yeah.
And I think that it is very combined with delegation because the point is you can't ask for more or demonstrate your readiness if you are in day-to-day fire drill mode. You're not signaling readiness. In fact, back to this meetings where I've been in with senior executives and they're talking about, Rebecca, and they're like, "Oh, she's amazing, a top talent," and like, okay, let's give a Rebecca this special assignment that's coming up. It's global, and give her more exposure. And then, no, 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 we can't give her any more. She's like treading water. She has too much. And so sometimes we're signaling to our leaders, we can't take on more. And I'm not saying that's not true. In fact, I bet it is true. But the problem is you have to find the way to be able to create capacity because I find that most managers aren't going to do that for you. So it does go back to delegation. And so the second part is how do I know what to delegate? And I think there's a couple litmus tests you can do. First is it core to my purpose for being in the company? Like if it's absolutely core, you're a salesperson and you're responsible for account management for the Northeast, you're not going to give all your accounts and delegate those. That's your reason for being, right? So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is that it's not something that is it has a lot of like organizational complexity that would be very hard to hand off. Difficult relationships, a lot of situational issues between departments that's going to take a lot of finesse. You're not going to get that off because that's probably pretty complex. So it has to be something where I think of it as a responsibility, not just a task. So a task would be, hey, I'm going on vacation next week. Can you handle any calls that come in? Of course, that has to happen. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, can you own the, communication that's client facing? That's a responsibility. Can you own all the, messaging that's going out to these customers and, this region? That's a responsibility. That's not a task. So if you want to get good at this, it's not just handing off small things and getting tiny tasks done. You'll get a little win, but you're not going to get the major win you need to show your boss you are ready for more. So you have to be thinking about what can I delegate? And then here's the other thing. I don't think of it as you give it all in one fell swoop. I think you have to think about the person and their capability and what can you hand off in chunks if you are trying to set them up for success. And
Yeah.
so I guess the bottom line is, yeah, I think there's a methodology to do it. I think because it's going to be a higher level thing than just assigning small things off your plate, and I think it's over time. It's helping someone gradually be able to get to the place where they can own it, and you feel comfortable taking your hands off the wheel
Yeah.
and letting that person operate independently.
I love the clarity around that. And you're absolutely right. There are certain situations where someone could be sending a signal that they're not ready for more and yet they want more. And so having awareness of self and how you're approaching a problem, I see
Yeah,
as an operations leader how important it is to create capacity. And in some ways, it's everybody's job to be able to figure that out too,
yeah.
especially if you're looking to expand for yourself.
Right. I was just coaching a leader last week where we were working on this skill, and I thought it was very vulnerable for him to say, sometimes we hold on to things that we probably should give up, but they're comfortable to us. We know how to do it in our sleep. We can get it done really, really fast, right? We're known for it. And who doesn't want to be known for being able to accomplish things fast? The problem is that sometimes we got to get out of our own comfort zone. And he's struggling with, I've created capacity for myself. Now I have to do things more strategically. And it's not really, I've been in like fire drill mode for so long. I'm now finding I've got to stretch myself. And I wasn't expecting that to be an outcome of delegating well.
There's always a little bit more to it, isn't there? And the extra part I'm thinking about as you're sharing that is the understanding that you now, in having the ability to create more capacity for yourself, have to take more time with that person and, to your words, set them up for success. You probably need to avoid just simply giving them the responsibility, but coaching them through it and being available. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a one size fits one.
Mm.
And I think it's very much dependent on, if you have someone who's a very fast learner, if there's many repetitions for it. Like sometimes I'm coaching people who they're delegating something that happens, let's say, a quarterly report that only happens 4 times a year. So it's going to take longer to get someone versus, oh no, this is something that's happening every week. So you're thinking about the person and their capability to take on more, their skill set. Maybe there's parts of it they can do, but you wouldn't give them the entire responsibility yet. So it's very, very customized to the individual.
That's another great point. I don't think leadership is a cookie cutter approach. And certainly when it comes to managing, delegating, all of that, yeah, you have to apply context and it's about the person too. So all of this is wonderful insight. I know we're at time, Therese, and I don't want to keep you, but I know we could go for hours. That you're definitely welcome back anytime. Yeah, before we wrap though, I want to make sure that people get a chance to learn more from you, work with you, and glean from all of your extra wisdom. So where would you like people to go to find you online?
Okay, first thing is find me on LinkedIn. And the reason I'll direct you there first before my website is that I post 4 to 5 times a week on topics like this. So my point is to give you a lot of value that you can immediately use in your day. So follow me on LinkedIn. I also have a newsletter on LinkedIn so I can get a little bit more long form and some of the topics I'm working with a lot of individuals as I coach them. You'll find the newsletter there. The book, The Facilitation Advantage, is written to be for every leader. It is, again, not a book for facilitation experts, and it's not meant to be read cover to cover. I don't think people have time for that. So it's very much a diagnostic. And then you figure out, like, where am I having some challenge? And then you go to the chapter that will focus on the skill that will give you very practical insight. So you can find that book on Amazon and other places. And then the last thing I'll offer to all your listeners is if this is resonating with you and you're finding like you might want to take this deeper or you want to work through a different kind of challenge, in the show notes I know you'll list my calendar invite, so I'd welcome a discovery call with anyone that feels like they need more of this in their organization or they need this for themselves. So I'm happy to continue the conversation individually.
Absolutely. Therese, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope everybody will go to grab a copy of the book, connect with you on LinkedIn. I know I will, and keep the conversation going. I love being able to connect beyond just the boundaries of the podcast here. And thank you so much to all of our listeners of Bad Bosses, Great Leaders podcast. We'll catch you for the next one.